Both karma and reincarnation are, topics that a lot of people teach in a lot of different ways. I spent a lot of the last year and a half when I was away from home. I was mostly in India, and I was, coals to Newcastle to a certain extent, and I had to find my way how to go to the place where these teachings had originated and present something that was worth presenting. This morning, and I'll just summarize it a little more quickly for those of you, since many of you were here. But what Paramhansa Yogananda brought was a new expression of an ancient teaching, and he also brought what you would have to call a corrective of aberrations and misunderstandings that had begun to settle in. And I think in the subject of karma, and reincarnation is very tied to that, this is a subject in which the more common it's been talked about, the less it's understood. I've been involved in these teachings for so many decades now, from the time when there were very few people till these words have become common. Chakras, karma, even the word dharma, guru, all these words are all just everywhere. I was in the supermarket, the Safeway supermarket near my home, and there's a rack that has what's called Harlequin romances. I don't know if they have them here. It's a particular publishing company. And it's always, the story of he and she, and then after great difficulty, they finally get together. Always has happy endings, always has huge turmoil in the middle. So, say again?
I think we call them Mills and Bone.
Mills and Bone? I see, the same thing. Okay, you've got the picture, right? So there's a whole rack of them. And on the cover, there's a picture, and it looks like, it's a little bit maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago by the costume. And there's a picture on the cover, and she's of this woman, and she's in a passionate embrace with this one man. But there's another face sort of over here. And so she's kind of looking off like this, embraced by him and looking off like this. And the tagline to try to get you interested says, "Was it Mildred's karma to be with Harold?" And I thought, oh dear, we have arrived, but perhaps in the worst possible way. It's penetrated that far. So now people can toss the word about, but I haven't found necessarily, except through what Swami Kriyananda has talked, we don't quite know what to do with it. In India, it's become the way of excusing everything, I have to say it. It took me a couple of months there to get really comfortable and to figure out how to say this. The way karma is always expressed when people talk about it in India, and this is with respect, I say this, oh, it's just and it's always an exhalation followed by a slight collapse. Oh, I guess it's just my karma. And so every articulation of the word is a collapsing into helplessness. Now, yeah, it is your karma. Everything's your karma, but anything that causes us to collapse into helplessness is, one, not particularly useful or enjoyable, and also not correct. Because the fact of the matter is we are infinite beings with infinite potential and the power to overcome all obstacles. So if any philosophical concept drains us of energy rather than giving us energy, we probably have it wrong. And karma really is way up there in that story. So the meaning of karma is really very simple. It's cause and effect. And in everything in this world, in science, everything, it's Newton's law as applied to human life. We feel like we're having a random experience, but in fact, everything about our life experience is actually a cause and effect. But the difficulty is that to discern what the cause is and what the effect is not always so simple. It's very easy, to push something and have it come back, or whatever. We can make actions and reactions that are easy to watch. You put your hand in the water and the water is dispersed. You can see where it goes. But in our own lives, we don't always remember what the causes are, and we don't always rightly interpret the effect. And so for someone to use the words like this, it's like, well, then immediately, what about children who are born into difficult homes? And you just can go through a long list. I'll take those questions in a minute, not yet. Okay? What we really have to start with is we have to start with a much bigger question, which is, what are we doing here and what's the nature of life? And we were asking the same question this morning because you have to ask that question over and over and over again. You can't really tell where you are or whether you're making any progress unless you have some idea of where you're going. We act in our lives for one of two reasons. We believe that what we're doing will help minimize our suffering, or we believe that will increase our happiness. And oftentimes, what we do to increase our happiness actually increases our suffering. But nonetheless, that's what's motivating us. Even if we crawl into our rooms and don't come out and just sit in our place and eat candy bars, we imagine somehow that that's better than going out and facing our life. We wouldn't be doing it. Even little tiny creatures, snails and worms and so on. Swami Kriyananda is fond of saying, even a worm, which is about as simple a living creature as you could get, he said, if you poke it with a pin, it will withdraw and try to get away from that pain. It's conscious, it has enough consciousness. Every living thing has enough consciousness to feel the pain and want to escape from it. And so we, in our long trajectory, and when we bring in the reincarnation element, we'll talk about this a little bit. We are on this long cycle of looking for happiness, trying to escape pain, and going through many, many iterations of testing and finding out what works and finding out what doesn't work. Isn't that so? I mean, when we go through adolescence, I remember, just a brief period of time. I was never much of a conformist, but I had a couple of years when I tried, and I tried to dress like the other adolescent girls dressed. And I remember going to some party in a pair of high heel shoes, just sort of walking in the high heel shoes in the most awkward, impossible manner. And coming home and just realizing this isn't worth it, whatever it is. I don't know what I'm supposed to gain by this, but whatever it isn't worth it. The suffering does not bring the happiness that we wanted. And I took them off, and I've never put on another high heel shoes in my life. Tiny decisions, but our life is a collection of those, isn't it? That we think that this way of being is going to give us happiness. We find out whether it does or not, and then we move forward to try another. And we start at just some point. We don't really know. We don't remember how we got to where we are. I remember speaking of adolescence, I was a skinny, sort of sassy child, and all of my girlfriends matured much before I did. So I still had a tiny little stick figure, and I was not very attractive to the boys, especially compared to some of the others. And I also had this, I would only call it a mental intensity that was not always welcome either. I actually became very funny, though, because as a consequence of that, because all I had was my personality. I had nothing else going for me, so I learned to be funny, which has served me. But I remember sitting at one of those adolescent parties. I don't know what your culture is here at that time, but I was in somebody's rec room basement, and they were playing music over a record player, and nobody was asking me to dance. Nobody was within 100 feet of me if the room had been that large. And I remember sitting against the wall with the kind of slightly dramatic feeling of a teenage girl. But a very odd experience came to me, and I don't really know how, I would say, I don't know how divinely inspired it was, and I don't know how cosmically important it was, but it was felt important at the time. I was aware of being different. I didn't know what to attribute that to. Now I actually understand. My difference was that I was more aware, literally. I was aware that I just somehow had a view of life without having any words for it. But I knew that I saw life in a much bigger way than all of these kids did around me. And it was almost like they sensed that I was just slightly alien, the stranger in the strange world. A lot of people that I speak to, because naturally they're the people who would come and be in the world that I'm in now, we've all had that experience. I just would wonder how they did it. How did they relate to each other? What did they talk about? It was just, I could never figure out what people were doing, really literally until I met Swami Kriyananda. I felt like I participated. I was a perfectly normal looking, seemingly well-adjusted person. But inside, I was always leaning against the wall, just watching, trying to figure out what the heck was going on here. But I was 13 and I was sitting there, and this thought, I would almost call it a voice, came into my mind and said, basically, you could be more like them and you could be popular. You know, you could sort of have that life you're looking at, but you would have to give up something in yourself. Or you could stay as you are and pay the price of that. And I didn't hesitate. There was no question in my mind. It was no temptation. I had to stay as I was. And whether that was really an important moment or not, I don't know. But it came to me with that kind of force. We don't know why we are who we are and why we start. But we have gone through a certain number of experiences, and this is the point at which we have to begin. And this is in terms of what will make me happy and what will relieve suffering. I was suffering in my adolescent way at that moment, and it was almost like you could not suffer. You could just relinquish whatever it is that's holding you apart, and you could go right into the center of that, and then you wouldn't have to suffer in this particular way. But I realized that that was not a choice that would work. And so I had to go on the way I've gone, and gradually you find your way. You find your own people, you find your own footing, whatever it might be. But nonetheless, here we are. We're fighting whatever battles are given to us. And that's a battle, as Yogananda once described it. You have to fight the battle for joy, exactly on the ground that you're standing. And so we have this experience where we are always trying to find the path that's going to multiply the joy and diminish the suffering. And we make those decisions according to what we understand in the moment. Last night I was speaking about everything in life being an ever-expanding state of awareness. And if we can trace that trajectory at all in our lives, we have to ask the question about how aware can I become? And we're fighting certain fundamental battles. Last night I called it superconscious and subconscious. Here's another way of thinking about it. We sometimes believe that the way to diminish suffering is to decrease awareness rather than increasing it. And that looks like drugs, alcohol, television, sugar, junk food, eating, all the different things that we can do, just dullness of all kinds, oversleeping. It's like, I don't like the way it feels, so the way I'm going to deal with it is I'm going to dull everything down. Of course, the problem with dulling things down is it does absolutely nothing about the cause. And so when that dullness wears off, we're back exactly where we are, and nothing has changed. I had my particular, even insanity, mental imbalance of various kinds is a form of that. It's like, I don't like the world I'm living in, I'm just going to go over here and create a different one. And not all mental imbalance is metaphysical in nature, but a great deal of it is. When I was, just before I met Swami Kriyananda, when I was living in a state of, I was quietly desperate. I was in Thoreau's quiet desperation at that point, or it was Emerson is the one who said it. And I remember standing at a window and thinking about whether I should just have a nervous breakdown. It seemed like kind of like a good idea to me. Oddly, I thought about whether I should just become an alcoholic, a drug addict, or just have a nervous breakdown, just like, escape from this reality. It was, and the reason I thought of it just like that, and now I do believe in past incarnations. I think I've tried it in the past. I think I've just exited and just gone into a world of, voices, and I'm not making light of these things, but, just gone, made my own reality. And I remember standing at the window of the apartment I was living in, looking at the backyard, thinking, if I have this kind of a breakdown, gradually people will notice, and then they'll come and get me. They'll take me to a hospital. I'll spend a long time in the hospital. They'll give me a lot of drugs. Then I'll have to get off those drugs. Then eventually I'll go to a halfway house, and then eventually I'll get home, and then eventually I'll be standing at this window feeling exactly as I feel right here, except I'll be probably in debt and really tired. And it was just like, it's not going to work. You know, I never in this life had to face substances, but I know that many people do in their life, and that's why we do it. It's just the unbearable. It's unbearable. Whatever it is that we're experiencing, it's unbearable. And we imagine if I become less aware, then I will have less suffering. And the problem is, you see, it works temporarily. Just, you know, in the short term, it actually does seem to work. But the long-term cause and effect is not a good one. Because among other things, it stops working, and it has also chaotic consequences that you have to pay. But that temptation is enormous because it's actually, what do I want to say? It's fundamental. Because the alternative to dulling our consciousness and becoming less aware is to realize that we actually suffer less and have more happiness the more aware we become. But awareness takes courage. I used to teach in our community for many years our beginning meditation classes. And on the last week of the 4-week series, I would talk to people about why people stop meditating. And I say one of the reasons that people stop meditating is that it actually works. And what happens is meditation increases your awareness. And often then we become aware of many things we really would rather not be aware of. I did a meditation class once where it was very interesting. The second class, I said, well, how did it go in meditation? And everybody in the class had a problem. This one said as soon as they sat to meditate, they felt very angry. This one said as soon as they sat to meditate, they began to cry. This one said they began to feel very lonely. This one said, every time I sit to meditate, I get really hungry. It was just about 5 different things, each person. Because what happens is we are normally very, very distracted. We keep ourselves away from knowing what we feel. I just went out to the ladies' bathroom here, and you go through the lobby, and there's a little bit of music, and as soon as you get into the women's bathroom, presumably the men's as well, the loudspeakers turned up a lot higher. And I always think about this like, who thinks I need to be entertained? Like, why can't I just go into the bathroom in quiet and just for one moment be alone with myself? But there's this belief that we have to always be stimulated. And the reason people are doing that is because they don't want to be aware of what's going on inside. And it's an evil, self-perpetuating reality in our society right now, which is that everything is always pushing you away from awareness. And so when you sit down to meditate, sometimes for people it's the first time ever that they're actually alone with their thoughts. And meditation does not create anger, sorrow, insatiable appetite, or anything like that. It merely makes you aware of it. And then we have to decide, where are we going to go from here? And the temptation to dull down is what we face. Or I need to find out why I'm feeling this way. Of course, then that may lead to the awareness that many things about my life are not really in line. And then I'm going to have to do something about my life. And this is what happens when I'm talking to that meditation class. It begins to work. It's when you walk up to the top of the mountain, you can see also into the valley, can't you? And you can see all the hills beyond, and you can become aware of that, which you may well have been hiding from all your life. That doesn't mean it's not ruling your life. It just means that you weren't watching it. And so one way to do it is you shoot the messenger. Oh, meditation makes me aware of a lot. I won't meditate anymore. That's a simple solution, isn't it? I'll just go back into the closet and then just wait. But nonetheless, it's pushing us. And then our suffering becomes causeless. We don't understand. We don't know why, and therefore we can't fix it. Okay, this is all karma. And what happens to us is the things that happen to us do not go away. That's the simplest way to say it. Because I spoke last night of ego. You know, ego is the jiva, which is the individual spark of spirit. You can call that soul if you like. Okay, and it's identified. And it has defined and identified itself with the ephemeral world, which is to say what happens today, what happens tomorrow. I'm identified with this single life that I'm living. And so therefore, I think that everything that happens to me is about me and I hold on to it. That's why when you're an adult, you're still behaving the way you responded as a child. A very dear friend of mine recently came to the realization that he was raised by a very abusive alcoholic father. He had simply blotted that fact out. But his whole life was run by that fact. And it was just very well into his adulthood before that fact came to his awareness. And because he had identified with it, his ego was still formed by that experience. And so therefore that was how he was moving through life. So everything that happens to us, in truth, every thought that we think, every feeling that we have, every desire that we have, it seems to come and go, but it stays with us. And let me explain to you how that actually works. We are on a journey, and that journey is from the most limited identification that we can have as this limited lifetime. Matter is the only reality. Once this body is gone, it's over. Doesn't make any difference what I do. There's nothing beyond this moment. But that's the most limited reality. At this end, you have, I'll put a big heart, you have what you could call Christ consciousness, the unity with everything. The knowledge of ourself is one with the infinite. And everything that we do somehow falls somewhere on this spectrum. Somewhere between complete impossible narrowness of perception and infinite perception. It's a little bit like the keys on a piano. Every key has a particular vibration. And when they tune it right to that vibration. Well, between God realization and infinity and the most limited expression of life that the human being can have, everything is reflective of what we believe to be real. And not what we think or can articulate, but what is really the facts of our reality. I'm very good at explaining this philosophy, and I can talk a lot about not really being the body and just being one with the infinite and everything that happens that's perfect. And if I'm driving down the freeway and I think I'm about to have a wreck and I think my body's going to be smashed, I'm not proud to say that the first thing I think of is, oh dear, what's going to happen to me? This instinctive fear. I was in an earthquake in San Francisco in 1989, and I was inside our wooden buildings, and the building began to it was the worst earthquake I'd been in there. It was the worst one that had happened in a long time. Building begins to sway like this. The first thing that occurs to me, because I'm such a darn wordsmith, it's just really embarrassing. Even in a crisis, I start editing. I thought of the phrase, I really thought of this. Earthquake proof, I thought. That's oxymoronic. There's no such thing. If God wants to shake it hard enough, it'll fall over. And I thought the problem was that the building was shaking. So I ran out of the building because it was like here, I could just get outside that fast. So I ran outside, and darned if the earth wasn't shaking. It's all just going like this. And there was a swimming pool not far away, and I watched most of the water of the pool come up in this tidal wave over the fence and then fall over the other side. And the trees are swaying. It does such weird things to your mind. I know you all are prone to that here. When that which is supposed to not move really starts moving, you just don't know where to put it. Some of my friends told me later that as soon as it began to shake, I just began to pray to God, Om Guru, Om Guru. I didn't, not at all. I was going, just like that. It took me a really long time before I calmed down. I did not immediately surrender to God. I simply didn't. Panic was too strong, but I certainly was not calm and centered. Because when it came right down to it, I just did not go right to infinity. I kind of hung out. I wasn't really there, but I hung out about here. That's just where we are. When somebody says something unkind to you, what's your immediate response to them? I was in a very difficult situation in a litigation. Ananda was involved in this litigation, and the case was just a pack of lies from start to finish. But justice does not always happen in legal situations. And in the end, the verdict went against us, and this woman who had just made this whole thing up, and it was just appalling, actually won a lot of money. And I, again, every so often I can be proud of myself. I was a little embarrassed in the earthquake, but I was real proud of myself in the courtroom, because when she won all that money, my first thought was compassion for her. Oh my God, not only has she done this awful, dishonest thing, but now she's won, and she's going to get all this money. And it's going to take her that much longer before she realizes what a bad cause she set in motion. But I was so happy that instead of being angry, upset, outraged, any of those things, I just felt compassion for the inevitable suffering this poor soul was going to have to go through, who was already miserable and now was going to be even more miserable. So I get to put a big check up here on that one, right? Now, if you start looking through the course of your life, then this is not God's will, God's grace, whether you're saved, whether you go to hell, nothing. This is just how are you vibrating, moment by moment. In ordinary life, where is your consciousness? In crisis, where is your consciousness? Here's an interesting story. A woman friend of mine had a very childlike way of speaking and being. In fact, she actually had a lisp, a rather pronounced lisp, so she sounded like a little girl a great deal of the time. When her second child was born, the birth was very difficult and the baby was in great distress, and it was not clear for some days whether that baby would live or not. And my friend was parked at the hospital just taking care of that baby, and I went to visit her with another friend just to give her an energy and support. She was not lisping at all, not a bit. She was fighting for the life of her child, and it was gone. I mean, it was so dramatic. It was like, there is no space for me to be the child here. I need to be the mother warrior. It came back, but during that time it was gone. Isn't that interesting? I was just amazed. My other friend didn't notice. I said, did you notice? She wasn't lisping at all. Her whole speech pattern had changed. Fantastic, isn't it? This is just who we are in the moment. What are we capable of, and how can we carry it through? So this pattern from complete delusion to complete freedom actually is your spine. And it is the chakras in the spine. I've made this horizontal, but the chakras are vertical from, I'll do one of my great pieces of art here. There you are. Okay. And here's the heart, and here's your happy face. Here's your spiritual eye. Okay? The chakras are from the base of the spine really to the top of the head. Okay? It's interesting. The spine, when the sperm and ovum come together in the first cell, Yogananda states that the soul, so to speak, consciousness, life begins at that point. I know that's a very controversial point because of the whole abortion issue, but he states that life begins at that point. There's a Jewish joke, which probably can be transferred to other groups. The Jewish joke is, the rabbi is asked, at what point does the embryo become a person? The rabbi says, when he graduates from medical school. But Yogananda says, no, it comes in at this point. But if you look at the little books of, your developing embryo, what happens, the first thing that happens is there's this little straight line. That's the beginning of the life, because the origin point of life is right here at the medulla. This is the one point in the human body that can't be operated on. If this point is interfered with, your life stops. If someone has a brain tumor, when it touches that point, that's when it takes your life. And there's other more complicated esoteric reasons, but I'm just going to leave it at the moment. So that's the first cell. And the first thing it makes the spine. It has to go all that, because this bottom chakra, this is not a class about the chakras, but they're interrelated. This is the earth chakra. And so in order to make a physical body, you have to go all the way down to the material level. Every chakra has a positive and a negative dimension. I'm doing the simplified version here. So that's what happens. And then all the nerve plexes are all centered along this same channel, and then the physical body starts being built. It's interesting that you can cut off both legs, you can cut off both arms. A person can live from the base of the spine to the top of the head. You can be a worm, essentially, like that. But you can't be less than that. Because if you're less than that, you're intruding into where the vibration, because it's not a physical thing, but the vibration of the length of the chakras are involved. And you can't be less than that. It's interesting, isn't it? Okay. So each of the chakras represents, let's say, this, I'm going to use the spiritual eye as the top of this. This is perfect attunement of the individual with the infinite. That's what the spiritual eye represents. Spiritual eye is here. The ego is here. This is self identified with infinity. This is self identified with the physical, with the body and its limitations. Spiritual life, this is the same chakra. This is opposite poles of that same chakra. And actually, spiritual life is to change your sense of identity from ego to spirit. All right? So let's say that's complete identity with spirit. This is complete identity with matter. And what that means is with that which is finite, limited, separated, that which is infinite, unlimited, and non-material. And everything that we do in the chakras here, just to stop first, second. Okay, third chakra, this is where the belly button is. That's the third chakra, the heart chakra. Then the throat chakra here, the medulla in the back, and the spiritual eye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. So, but each of these, in terms of what I had horizontally, represents one of these vibrations. And when you act in loving kindness toward the world, when whatever energy you put out, and this is now just an energy system, it centers here as a vortex of energy. Now, the chakra system is not physical, but it's the blueprint that makes the physical body. I was talking to someone last night about looking at this beautiful building. Everything that we see manifested has to begin first as an idea, doesn't it? Somebody had to have the idea that we would build this. And somebody had the idea of, let's tie it to this beautiful outdoor world. Let's make this room versatile. Let's make the walls movable. Let's make this interesting view out to the lake. I mean, somebody had to have this idea, right? They thought about it. Hopefully these rooms feel like someone had real intuition when they thought about it. Let's make this interesting skylight in the middle. There's lots of beautiful elements here. But when that person merely thought of it, it just remained a thought, wasn't it? And so then they had to start applying energy to it. And they had to make a blueprint, is how a building is made. They made a blueprint. And they had to they had to gather a lot of energy into a very specific focus. And then all that gathered energy had to manifest through more application of energy, but now energy of a much grosser type to bring this into manifestation. And everything in creation, including us, has all three of those elements. We have what's called the causal, which is the thought plane, the astral, which is the energy plane, and the material plane where we're living now. The chakra system goes through all three of those worlds. And it is the idea of who we're going to be, the energy pattern of who we're going to be, and then the manifestation of who we're going to be. So that's why when the sperm and ovum come together, the way Yogananda described it, he said when those two cells meet, there is a flash of light in the astral world. And the astral world is the energy plane where we go between our physical incarnations. And all those souls who are in tune with that light, who are ready to reincarnate, will push to get into that womb. And he says, they sort of rush. And sometimes more than one gets in. Odd, isn't it? Like that. Now, there's this wonderful story my friend told me when I was telling the story in the class. Her child was 5 years old, and mommy had displeased him in some way. And like little children are, sometimes you know how to get back at mommy. I hate you, mommy. You're a terrible mommy. So he said that, but she, being a rather solid mommy, just let him do it. And he wandered off. But he was going away and he felt he hadn't really expressed himself fully. So he came back to her and he said, "You weren't even my first choice." Like that. She was totally intrigued. And so she says, "Well, honey, who was your first choice?" And he answered, a lady in the Philippines, but she was taken. That's what he said. Now, when she heard me tell this whole story, she described the character of her son. She said he's a capable person, but he has an unusual habit that she perceived, which is he'll start towards something and then he'll stop and think about it for just a moment and make a decision one way or another. She could just see him in the astral world heading for that woman in the Philippines, pausing for just a second, and then somebody else getting him instead of him. And him being stuck with her after all of that. Isn't that wonderful? But we're drawn to it because there's something in the vibration that matches the composite signal of who we are. Because what we have here is over the course of a lifetime, over the course now of many lifetimes, because this is non-physical. This is the energy field that moves in and out of physical incarnation. We finish all that we're capable of learning through the body that we're in, and the moment comes, whether you're 2 years old or 102 years old, you have the consciousness expansion potential of the body you're in has finished. And the body is not an end in itself. It's a means for us to learn the difference between delusion and freedom, between who we imagine ourselves to be and who we really are. And the only reason we're on this planet is to test our responses against that challenge and see how we will respond. The cause is put in, what effect does it have on us in this moment? Somebody yells at you and says you're horrible. Do you yell at them and say they're horrible back? And what level of reality have you affirmed when you do that? Where does your happiness come from? How is suffering avoided? Last night I talked about when my husband was driving the motorhome, and a motorhome we were in, and he made a sudden move and peanut butter jar fell on my foot. And I felt the pain in my foot. I felt it shoot up to my brain, and it was just about to come out of my mouth. And my foot hurt, so I'm going to yell at my husband. Like, how is that going to help your foot? But I caught it just in that second. That's a vibration of I'm completely separate from anything else in the universe, and if you hurt me, I'll hurt you, and that'll solve that, won't it? That's how little children are, aren't they? I don't like you, I bite your arm. You have to teach them not to bite and scratch and kick because they just think that they're the only thing in the universe and everything revolves around them. But that sets up a certain cause, and the universe treats you like it doesn't really care about you either, does it? You know, what do you matter? You've set up a certain vibration. When we first moved into the community where we live, it's an apartment complex, that's what our community is. It was an existing apartment complex. We took a master lease. And there were a lot of people already living there, and some of them did not have very elevated consciousness. That's how come we could afford it. But in any case, the area has gentrified around us, but the apartment that we were living in at that time backed on where people parked their cars. At 6 a.m. on one Saturday morning, one of the existing tenants pulled his car up so that he was literally within feet of where we were sleeping. He wanted to do mechanical work on his car. He tuned the radio to whatever station he wanted to hear, put it up full blast so they could hear it above the work he was doing, and then just cheerfully went about his work. You know, we just wake up to this blah thing coming in the window. I look out the window at this guy. He's completely oblivious. He's completely oblivious. He doesn't know there's anybody on the planet but him. And of course, later, somebody's going to treat him with enormous disregard. And he's going to be so confused. Why? How come? Like this. The cause and effect, he set up this vibration of nothing matters but what I want. I'm the only person here. And so that's how he vibrates, and so that's what he attracts. Just like that. Or we understand up to the point of understanding that we're one with everything. So this energy pattern, everything that we do, registers as a little vritti of energy. Vritti means whirlpool, vortex. So really our chakras, chakra means wheel, they're all these little spinning vortices of energy, like this. And whatever we consistently do the most of, those vortices get bigger and bigger. Now, if you think literally of a whirlpool in a river, You know, this isn't a river. Where we're living, we're right on the river. A river is flowing like this, but things get all jammed up over here and some of the water spins, doesn't it? Like that. So that's precisely what each of these are. At the center of every vritti, there's some kind of a definition of reality, a sense of oneself, a concept of where happiness comes from and what causes suffering. And then we make a lot of decisions that create energy around us. We constantly try to get people to behave in the way we need them to behave to feel good. Or we have a generous attitude that makes us really eager to help people become happier in themselves. Each of them represents a different reality. Whatever we do is stored there. And so the energy flowing just stops in these little whirlpools. And those little whirlpools are, well, in a very real sense, they are, how to say it? Well, they are, well, let me go back to the pattern concept. So we end up with, at the end of any incarnation, or actually at any moment, just sitting here, we are the collection of all of this energy vibrating. That's why people who have that sight, can look at you. They, quote, read your aura. What they're reading is the light field coming out of this, or they're feeling the energy field there, and they can tell you all kinds of things about yourself, because all of us are a broadcasting station of our collective consciousness. And that's why people, you get feelings from people, don't you? Someone is attractive, someone is icky, someone is dull, someone is in tune with you, someone is repellent to you, because we're always vibrating in these certain ways with each other. And every thought, every action, every attitude, every decision is stored as a vibration of energy in the appropriate chakra related to this. And when we die, the physical body falls off, and it can't move anymore, but the energy form just goes on, just like the movies, where they die and then the same actor gets up, only they're a little luminous now and they can walk through the walls and they can't quite relate, but they're still themselves. This is the good news and the bad news about death. The way Swami puts it, nothing happens. Nothing happens, really. We just remain ourselves because we really are this pattern of energy. We're just living through our physical bodies, but when we can't live through our physical bodies, we continue to live this pattern of energy. And it goes off into the astral world. And the astral world is an energy world. And in the astral world, this world is a heterogeneous world. There are people of many different levels of consciousness all sharing the planet right now. This is what the planet is like right now. We're here interested in this, and there's other people who are watching sports probably, and other people who are getting really drunk, and there are people who are doing really mean things to each other, and there's all these different, and there's demons, demonic dark souls who are doing awful things to each other on parts of this planet, even as we sit here. The astral worlds are energy vibrations, and they're homogeneous worlds. Because it's a vibration, you go to the vibration that matches you, the collective vibration that matches you. This is the concept of heaven and hell. It's a reality. You go to the place of who you predominantly are. So good people who have an expanded awareness go to a nice place. Even if we're not perfect, we're still generally good. And that is where we'll go. And in the astral world, you can see a higher vibration, but you can't go into it. You can't blend with it. You can also see a lower vibration, and you can go down to help. So higher beings come to help people who are on a lower vibration and help pull them upward. And we hang out in that really comfortable world for as long as it serves our expanding awareness to do so. We may need to rest, we may need to recover, we can learn while we're there, but what happens is we still have these whirling energy patterns, such as, I really wanted to marry Harold. I really, really, really wanted to marry Harold, but Mervyn got in there first, and I ended up marrying Mervyn instead. But how I wish I could have married Harold. I believe that my suffering was caused by Mervyn, and my happiness would have been with Harold. Okay? So it's an unlearned lesson. It's something that still has to be experienced to be understood. Will Harold really make me happy? Was Mervyn the actual cause of my suffering? I have to find out. So you're up there in the astral world, all of a sudden you see that Harold has reincarnated. And oh my God, Juliet is also reincarnated. And suddenly you find yourself right down there living next to Harold. You don't really quite know how you got there, but you're there. And you are determined that Harold will be your husband this time. Of course, Harold might actually be a bit of a loser. Maybe you just didn't really know that. But you have a pattern in your chakras that says this is who I have to be, right? I saw this woman movie star once, and she was so quintessential movie star. And I looked at her and I thought, how many incarnations have you wanted to be a movie star? Because you could just see she just had built the perfect body, the perfect attitude, the perfect everything. You know, each incarnation, she waits for the flash of light where she can be a super gorgeous whatever, and just keeps following that out because of the belief, oh, my suffering is caused because my thighs were too heavy. And my happiness will come when I have that just perfect slim hip look, won't it? So you get to try it out. We know in all our lives, we're restless now. You know, if I were just a little younger, a little fatter, a little skinnier, or married to Harold instead of to Mervyn, everything would be better, don't you think? We have decided that's where our happiness comes from. This is what causes our suffering. Now, of course, the truth is, we were talking about this some this morning, our fulfillment is inherent. We are made of the divine, and our happiness is our true nature, but when we don't experience it, we project on the world around us that somehow it's caused by that. That is the unlearned lesson. The nature of the spiritual eye is to identify entirely with spirit, and then therefore this world is just what it is. But my true reality is spirit. All of the other chakras, in one way or another, identify us with a reality that is not really us. And it's an unlearned lesson that we have to go through over and over and over again. This is where reincarnation comes in. Because one lifetime just isn't enough to work this pattern out. And karma is, the word for karma is unlearned lessons. There's something I don't know about what causes happiness and what causes suffering. And so I get to find out. Now there's an interesting little piece on this, and then we'll take a break. Swami Kriyananda said once that we learn from being disappointed. You know, we learn when we're disappointed, we learn to adjust, we dig deep, we find a way. But we learn more from being fulfilled. Because if we believe that this will give us happiness, we will never be at peace until we test that theory. And that's why we have to keep reincarnating over and over again, because we have to find out. And things do make us happy to a certain extent. As my mother-in-law said to me, she said, having a happy marriage does make your day-to-day life more pleasant, which I thought was a pretty small comment. I wanted a lot more than that. But the older I've become, the more I understand what she meant, which is nothing will deeply fulfill us except a realization of our own true nature. But if we imagine that it will, then we'll always be restless until we get to find out. Isn't that so? And that's what draws us back over and over again. Swami Kriyananda put it this way: the two things that make us reincarnate is longing for something that we haven't yet experienced and regret over something we feel we did wrong and want to fix. In other words, we're not at peace with reality as we experienced it, so we're still in this movement like this. But when we have finally learned, and think about this, Yogananda said something that's just appalling in its implications, but there it is. He said, we have to experience everything before we're really convinced that our happiness lies within. That was the song that Dambara was singing. And so anything that you're no longer drawn to, and this means, violent actions, dishonorable actions, thievery, gluttony, drunkenness, anything you're no longer drawn to, really not drawn to, is because you've tried it and you really know that it doesn't work. And it's very interesting to look at your own life because we've all gone through things that we've tried and we know they don't work, haven't we? That we really have tried them. And it takes no discipline to resist it. I don't have to take a vow not to murder people. I'm just really not inclined to do it. But I can understand why people feel that way. Somebody just bothers you so much, you just can't help but believe that if you just got rid of them. I mean, we may have not very often, but the desire to have somebody disappear is there. In our community, we have this reality we have to deal with, which is not only are we together for this lifetime, but we're together for incarnations. And we're never going to escape each other. We have to just work it out. It's like marriage geometrically, like to the 10th power. It just never ends. And so we have to learn. We have to learn to love each other and get along. And every community has people who are easier or harder to get along with, and our community is no exception. Somebody came to complain to me virulently about someone else's behavior. You know, it was not an invalid complaint. This person had many virtues and also was not as easy to get along with as some. But this woman was telling me, he did this, he did that, you've got to do something about it. So just to get her attention, I said, I have a great idea. Our community is built in a circle around a beautiful central park. I said, here's what let's do. Let's take him out into the middle of the green and let's execute him. We could shoot him or hang him, anything you want. Let's just get rid of him. And, of course, naturally, she looked horrified. But I said, but that's the natural extension of what you're saying to me. He bothers me, get rid of him. What are we supposed to do? I can't make him be something he's not. It's like, what are you going to do about it? How are you letting this person steal your peace of mind? Ooh, here comes another vortice. As long as I can incarnate where Mervyn isn't, then I'll be fine, right? But of course, this vibrates. You know how this vibrates? Mervyn, 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 Mervyn. And you find yourself, not only married, he's your twin. Maybe your Siamese twin. You are just totally trapped with Mervyn, right? So the desire to execute him is quite natural, isn't it? Now, of course, we didn't. But that thought could lead to it, wouldn't it? You see what I mean? We've progressed, but we haven't progressed all the way. There's still unlearned lessons there. And part of what this whole business about the chakras and the astral world and the energy body tells us, it's twofold. One thing it tells us, you see, is not everything is going to resolve quickly. This woman came to me for counseling once, and she was in a very complicated mess between two men and the old lover and the new lover, and it was really Olympic. And she says, I just want to finish this karma. I had to say, well, honey, find another counselor, because there's no way you're going to finish this karma. This is such a mess. You can progress this karma, but it's way too deep, and you're just not advanced enough to get rid of this karma. There are too many desires, confusions, attachments, unresolved emotions, unlearned lessons. So part of the way we begin to resolve this is, the first most important point is to realize everything you do is stored up and it never goes away. It has to be resolved. We could execute that man in the middle of the courtyard, but we would just set in motion a whole nother set of cause and effect, so that when he meets us the next time, he's our older brother and he tries to smother us with a pillow from very early on. He just can't stand us and feels he wants to get rid of us right away because of what happened in the past. You can't get out of any of this except by seeing through it and realizing a higher reality on the other side of it. And the second thing, and the other factor about this is, because of reincarnation and because you die exactly where you are and you're reborn, you just started over again, presumably you make some progress in the astral world. But if it's material world karma, you can't resolve it there. You have to come back into this world to do it. So that means that face it now or face it later, honey, there's no way out of it. And certainly in my own life, this whole philosophy has given me a determination and a stick-to-itiveness that I did not have before. Because I was more like, if I can get away with it, why not? But then there's this realization that there's no way to escape. If there is an aberration in my consciousness, I'm setting up a cause that will have an effect. And even if I have enough force to postpone that effect until the next lifetime, when it comes, it will be now. And I will not enjoy it any more then than I am enjoying it now. So there's this determination that sets in that we just have to do it right, whatever it takes. And I've had several times in my life where I had some really tough karma to face, and I just couldn't resolve it. But there was no point in quitting either. And my feeling was, God, it's been bad enough to have it in this incarnation. Do I want to see it again? I really don't want to see it again. Let me just at least go as far as I can. How do we go as far as we can, which is your question. This is a very impersonal system of energy. So you want to add as little as possible to the wrong understanding, add as much as possible to the right understanding. Now, this is not a fixed thing. This is just vortices of energy. And vortices of energy have magnetism. Think of the river and the whirlpool. There's something stuck in the center there. So the river is trying really hard to get to the sea. But some of it gets sucked over here and just spins around. It can't get to the sea. We're trying really hard to get to our spiritual potential and the happiness that implies. But I'm so upset about the autobiography of a yogi, and you're so mad at Mervyn that, that instead of our energy flowing smoothly, it just keeps whirling here. So there are several ways to get rid of that whirlpool. One, you can realize it wasn't really Mervyn's fault. I actually had an intolerance for gluten, and so I was crabby all the time. And then I thought it was Mervyn, but it wasn't really Mervyn. So all of a sudden, or let's be more fair, Mervyn's really not such a bad guy, and besides, he did the best he could. It was more the way I reacted to him than what Mervyn actually did. Let me just bless Mervyn and go on. Okay, he can learn his lessons, but I don't have to hang around with him anymore. So that's the same as you've pulled the tangle of branches out of the whirlpool. And what will happen, you see, is all of a sudden the whirlpool will just dissolve into the flow. And it'll just suddenly not be there anymore. It's like a piece of ice melting, like the whirlpool being liberated. So we work with these whirlpools on the most basic level that is not about what I'm teaching specifically, but we work with, say, psychological counseling. Like, what am I so angry about? Because many people have no idea why their energy is so divided. They just find that they're angry about this and upset about that and reactive about this, and they're not familiar with even what's going on inside. And psychological counseling can be very helpful. I've mentioned my friend who had suppressed the memory of his abusive alcoholic father. And it was a huge vortex over here. And so his energy could never quite go where it was trying to go, but he didn't know what was in the center there. And he had to explore the center of that a little bit. Okay, but once you have a kind of basic understanding and you're willing to be honest, and you're not trying to hide, there comes a point where you can work with this as just energy against energy. So the first thing you want to do, as much as you are able, is you want to not add to those whirlpools that are really distracting you from your purpose. And those would be anger, vengefulness, trying to force people to follow your will, a sense of being a victim, a passive attitude, and this is where, oh, it's just my karma, is absolutely the worst possible response. Because all that does is that you just sink in and it just stays there. You have to say, yes, this is my karma. You can say it just the opposite. This is my unlearned lesson, and let's get on with the task. So we see, well, I have a tendency to, get upset when this certain thing happens. So I need to take that very seriously and either run away if it's more than I can win, or be very, very conscious whenever this arises and not just casually respond. Or you have a relationship with someone that is just difficult. And so you become very conscious of doing your best not to add more fuel to that particular fire, more energy to that particular. And then simultaneously, sometimes you can't do anything about the bad ones. I just really dislike this person, but I have a positive relation over here. Let me try to build positive life experience. Let me try to generate energy. Now these chakras are, let's think of them sequential in terms of refining vibration. The more energy you put into kindness, into love, into selfless service, you may have great fears and angers about certain things, but if we can generate more and more energy here, what happens is this whirlpool is strong, but if we set up another one right here that gets bigger, it can suck that one into it. Now, on a very fundamental spiritual level, the energy up and down the spine, which is called the Kundalini energy, which is the spiritual energy of who we are. The other way you can dissolve a whirlpool is by if the flow of the river increases. When the rainy season comes and the river is full of water and it's flowing really strongly, the whirlpools, every whirlpool that has less magnetism to be a whirlpool than the river has power to go to the sea will just simply dissolve. And you won't ever have to know what it was. You never have to work on it. It just goes away. Now, this is why people say, and truly, don't worry about anything, just meditate. And it's a very scientific suggestion. Because what meditation is, I have to say, done correctly, with enough energy, it increases the flow of energy in the spine. And if the meditation, and not all meditation is the same, what we teach, and I'm not saying that to be chauvinistic, but it's consistent with what I'm saying, is how to bring the energy through all the chakras to strengthen that flow of energy and to focus it at the spiritual eye. Our meditation is taught from here. Some meditation is from here. Ours is from the spiritual eye. Because if the energy at the spiritual eye is strong, one, it pulls your identification from the ego to the spirit, and also it's the spiritual eye rules all the other chakras. And when you begin to meditate powerfully, especially through the practice of Kriya Yoga, which is a classic technique, we don't own it at all. And all true meditation is similar, if not exact. Because what it does is it makes the river flow really powerfully. That's why if you read an autobiography of a yogi, one round of Kriya, which is essentially one circulation of the energy through all the chakras up in a circle like this, is equivalent to 1 year of right living in terms of dissolving karma. Because what you're doing is you're increasing the flow of the river. And every vortex, vritti is the word, I'll just write that so I can say it without having to correct it every time. Vritti, every vritti of karma that has less energy to remain a vritti than the flow of energy going up and down the spine to the spiritual eye has, it just gets washed, literally washed away. And two things happen simultaneously. That energy is liberated, and suddenly you have more energy for your true intention, plus it's dissolved. You're not, you have forgotten about Mervyn. You've forgotten about the edited AY. You've just forgotten about it. You're just thinking, oh, well, people do what they do. What difference does it make? We all love God. And it's just gone because the energy that toward, what does it matter? We all just love God. I feel such bliss in my heart. I don't care what anybody else does, is stronger than that commitment there. So all of this energy is now flowing. And this is why people, when they start on a spiritual path, now there's many ways to create this flow. Meditation just happens to be the best. In the sense of the most direct, the most effective, the most efficient, and meditation that involves the flow of energy in the chakras and focuses at the spiritual eye. It's just very, very efficient because this is the master of the whole system. And so then you find, literally, and people tell me this all the time because I've been in this for years, so I've watched it. I've been meditating now, and they'll even say I haven't been meditating very well, but I've been meditating more or less regularly for the last year, and I was at work yesterday and my boss did that thing he's always done that used to just get me so upset, and I just didn't react. And they themselves, it's not like they decided not to react. There was just no vritti of energy within them anymore that would prompt a reaction. I'm so annoyed with my boss because he's such a turkey vritti had been generically dissolved by the increase in energy in the spine, just like the vritti in the river just gets washed in. And it's just gone. And when the same thing happens and you want to go over there to react, there's nothing pulling you. Your energy just keeps flowing in the river. So, to manifold reality here, try not to increase your bad habits because you begin to realize there's just no future in it. I'm setting up causes and I will reap the effects. Try to actively add to your system whatever positive you can add. And that means happy actions, generous actions, loving responses, creative work, the whole host of virtues. And whatever, even tiny ones, just even the tiniest, giving crumbs to the birds, just any tiny action that affirms that you are part of a greater reality and that makes you an instrument of expansive, happy energy. And you don't have to be St. Francis. You can just be, not be Torquemada or someone like that, just don't be Dracula. You just be somewhere on the spectrum and just be an inch bigger than you are, and everything behind you will be pulled forward, you see, because it's just a balance point. So wherever you're standing, you can make it better. And as an everyday attitude in your life, if you live more in the upper chakras, if you live more from the heart to the expansiveness of the throat, to the divine attunement of the spiritual eye, just on an everyday basis. I was in India, which I've mentioned I have been a number of times, but this was many years ago. When I first started going, I wasn't going in this capacity. I was a tour guide with my husband and 2 other friends. We took groups of Americans to India to visit the places especially described in Autobiography of a Yogi. We started doing that in 1987, 86 for accuracy. India was a very different country at that point. And I remember standing outside the Grand Hotel in Calcutta, which is indeed a grand hotel, and the way it just isn't there anymore, but there used to be a lot of beggars, and that was their turf. All the professional beggars there, that's where they hung out. And so we, with our lovely white skin and our expensive clothes, and relatively speaking, it was a hot spot. And so there were the really solid professional beggars, the really good ones were there. And we'd come out and they would just surround us. It was a big story. And, by comparison, we were just rolling in wealth. But I didn't like their energy very much. It wasn't nice. And more than that, I'm not a fool. I didn't dare pull out my wallet in such a situation. And I could have emptied my whole bank account. There was just it was hopeless. But I still wanted to do something uplifting for the situation. So this is what came to me. I felt like I needed help, and they sure needed help. So I came up with a very simple prayer. I said, Divine Mother, bless us all. I tried to just lift my consciousness from this anxiety about myself and the money and their suffering and what am I going to do. I just tried to bring myself at least to the heart, as close to the spiritual eye as I could, just be in that vibration. And I looked all the beggars right in the eye. I wasn't afraid. I decided just be unafraid. We're all just people. I just looked at them, but inwardly, I'm just saying quietly to myself, Divine Mother, bless us all. Bring light into this situation. Clearly, there's a lot of suffering, and even if I give them money, what we're dealing with is much more than that here. And it was so interesting to me, the whole vibration just completely calmed down. And I never gave them anything, and they just kind of cheerfully, we all just kind of vibed in that for a while, and then I walked away. I mean, wherever we are in our lives, we can always elevate it. Whether it will actually affect the people around us or not depends on their magnetism relative to ours. their receptivity relative to ours. Another interesting, just in the moment response, a friend of mine named Mike Heber. He was a policeman in the city of San Francisco. Eventually he became the head detective or the head of the department. And he was on a drug bust or in pursuit of a drug dealer. And they went into a very rough section of San Francisco, and they ended up in this tenement building. I mean, part of me thinks that sounds really stupid, Michael. Why did you do that? But anyway, they went in this tenement building, very narrow, rather twisting hallways, and they're in pursuit of some drug guy. And, he's carrying guns, and the drug guy's carrying guns, and Michael comes around a corner, and here is the guy. He's got a shotgun kind of thing, like this. It's right at Michael's heart, and they're this far apart, like this, just like that. And Michael's looking into the eyes of this guy, as he put it, they're just spinning. The man is, whatever he's on, he's not really there. Just in the moment. What's the natural thing to do? You sink down to the earth chakra. What about me? What about me? What's going to happen? Michael just thought, well, this could be it. And he just pulled all his energy into his spine. He started concentrating on his breath, which is, of course, the link between body and spirit. When the breath is there, the body is active. When the breath is gone, the spirit is withdrawn. He just stood in his breath, is how he described it. He said it wasn't hard to do because he didn't really think he had very many of them left. So he rather liked them. And he just stood in his breath, and he just stared right at this man. He did nothing else. And after just, a relatively short time that seemed like a really long time, the man just put the gun down and dropped it, just like that. But you can imagine if he'd done anything else, what would have happened. But all the time, we can always just be pulling it forward. And that's really helps. The more we live from the heart up and don't live in all the visceral reactions to get in and make it right and get our own, you begin to shift the balance. And you think at first, oh, this is just silly. This is not going to do anything for me, but it's amazing. Because once you start really shifting this balance, you have literally changed the blueprint for your life. Everything is manifesting from this. Shift this, you've shifted everything. And the thing about it is, once it really shifts, it's a permanent change. Because you've overcome it. You've perceived a new reality. You've set up a whole new cycle. You've started magnetism on a higher level that keeps you moving upward. Does that make sense? This is the basis of people saying everything that happens is exactly what needs to happen. And that doesn't mean it's good or happy or perfect or anything like that, but it's the result of the magnetic field that you are expressing. Now, this is a very tough teaching because really hard things happen to people. What if you were born into circumstances in which things were not very nice? To have to say to yourself, I was drawn there because magnetically that was the right place for me. I vibed somehow with what's happening there. Is not easy to accept. But you see, children are not innocent. They're just beginning a new incarnation, because when you die with this whole pattern intact, you're born with the same pattern. Your brain isn't developed. Your intellect, your ability to communicate is not developed, but your consciousness and your intelligence is exactly this already. And to be born into difficult circumstances is not necessarily a sign of God's displeasure or punishment. If you take a whole bunch of advanced placement classes in your high school and it's a really hard thing for you to do, you're not being punished. You're being given a chance to apply yourself with tremendous power and make enormous progress. So we will go where we have the capacity for the fight. And we can choose to just take on a heck of a lot this time in order to get through some of this stuff, because we're tired of it. We're just really tired of it by now. But if we're not tired of it, if we just want a little holiday, we're just exhausted and we're not vibrating with much determination at all, we might just get to hang out somewhere for a while. Swami Kriyananda, the first time we went to Hawaii, he said Hawaii is like not quite incarnating, especially before the white people came. You know, when it was just, you're just living on the islands and eating the coconuts and doing the hula and getting the fish from the sea. It's like, it's hardly the material world. It's like, we're just going to go, we're going to incarnate, but not quite. We'll just hang out there for an incarnation and nothing will be too tough. And next time I'll be in New York City. Because you're in this. This is your story. Nobody's doing this to you. And you can just look at the course of one lifetime. You take a year off, a couple of years off, a decade off, and then you get back in the story. Something tough to face, and I know I have to face it, but not now. I'm not going to deal with it now. Just extend that. It's very reasonable. And like I had some hard karma with someone at one point, and I separated myself from them in this life, and I said to Swamiji, you know, I was so engaged in that karma, and now I'm not at all. I'm sort of like, what's with this? And he said, well, maybe the karma is finished. And he just let me kind of have that for a few seconds. And then he said, but I don't think so. But he said, you've just taken it as far as you can take it. He said, it's just going to go on a shelf. And in some future life, you'll have to work it out. But you have to grow in other ways before you can deal with it. And so that's, as I understand, that's really how the flow goes. And you see, that's also common sense, because if you think about how you operate your life, you may have a difficult sibling or a hard relationship with your mother, but you may take a decade off and then just realize, well, now I better go in there and sort it out. So you take a few incarnations off, and then you get stronger in other ways, then you come back. But you realize that until it's resolved one way or another, and this is where the Kriya shortcut, as Yogananda calls it, the meditation shortcut, is I just get this energy so strong, I never have to deal with any of these things specifically. But you have to put out that much energy to just raise your whole vibration until they cease to be an issue. And you just find you're somebody else. It's most remarkable how much you can change. I was at Ananda, I came at the age of 24. I'm not a big person, but I was a really small person then, a little skinny person. I had these little dark frame glasses like this, and I wore my long hair in these tight little braids, and I was tense, is actually the only way I can think of it. Really intense like that. And Asha is the name that Swamiji gave me, so my first year or two there, I was not called by this name. And about, things happened. I ran the kitchen in the retreat at that time. My first couple of years was cooking. And a lot of the guests who came there would help me wash dishes and things. We had a very primitive situation. So we had lots of people who had to hand wash dishes. And this one couple spent like 3 weeks or so, and they mostly helped me in the kitchen, and we hung out together. 8 or 9 years later, that couple lived in New York City. I accompanied Swamiji to New York, and we were actually staying in their apartment. And we come in, and Swami introduces me, and they say, I say, oh, it's nice to see you again. They say, we've never met you. I said, yes, we met. We worked in the community kitchen. That wasn't you. That's what they said. That wasn't you. I said, yes, it was. They said, no, it wasn't. We did that a couple of more times, and I finally thought, Asha, just accept it. It wasn't you. And I said, yeah, you're right. It wasn't me, meaning that I'm somebody else now. And it was comical, and you could attribute it to my hair was short, my glasses were different, and I had uncurled just a little bit. But the real truth was, and I'll claim it, the vibration was different. They just didn't recognize me. And it's just a few years of conscientious work. You just, whoever you are, wherever you're starting, doesn't make any difference. You just start shifting it. And people won't recognize you. I think that's good. Okay, any other questions? Well, we get a slight hiatus. The ego self, the identification with who we are, is lighter for the first 12 years of our lives. That accounts for that innocence. That also counts the odd fact that when children reach puberty, which is approximately 12 years, your sweet little child suddenly comes to the breakfast table one day and says, I hate you, I've always hated you. And you say, what? Because all of a sudden they've come into things that were just really not there before. It doesn't have to happen that way, but it does. So there's a slight rest point at the beginning. But The flash of light that you're drawn to is a reflection of your chakras. The body that you've made is a reflection of the chakras. The place you've come is a reflection. It's impossible for you to be anything but that energy pattern. Now, many things can happen both in the astral world and at the end of life, which is one reason why euthanasia is not a good idea. Because those last days and hours, weeks, years, even if they seem intense, is a time for you to resolve many, many things. And even though it might not look like you're doing much, often people are doing a great deal. So it's quite conceivable that at the end of a murderer's life, even if he got away with it, there may be a realization. But he will simply be born exactly who he is. Right now on our planet, a lot of bad people are coming in, and children are doing horrific things, just terrible things. The violence of crime moving down to a younger and younger age, well, that's just who they are. They just get big enough to continue being what they are. I have a friend who's in prison, falsely in prison, but he's in prison, and he's been there for a long time. I visited him many times. The first time I visited him, I don't know how much of any of you who do prison work, this is my only prison ministry. The first time I went to see him, he was in a local jail. And the prisons, it was like a movie. It was like the stone holding tanks with the bars like this, and there was a wide aisle down the center, and there were people in these small holding tanks on both sides. I'm in a men's prison. I'm a woman. I've dressed as close to in a gunny sack as I possibly can. I'm walking down the dead center of this aisle like this, and these men have got the bars like this. And it's very boring in there, so just having anybody go by is entertainment. And I can feel all of them pushing psychically against those bars, trying to get out. But what was so fascinating to me is I could also feel as soon as they got out, they were going to do it again. Because it was just who they were. They had been thwarted, but they had not been changed. And the recidivism that is common in prisons, because they've been thwarted, they haven't been changed. And death, unless you have changed, you have just been thwarted. And then you get to start again. And it depends how much you've suffered. And depends on how, the karma is going to play out for all the factors that I answered Marie's question. This is a very challenging teaching because it takes away from you your capacity to be outraged at what people do to each other, because it's all just metaphysics. That doesn't mean you don't have compassion. That doesn't mean that your vrittis won't take you to try to make things better, but your sense of outrage is taken away from you. And the challenge to really understand that karma is just divine law and it's just going to play itself out, I know how hard this is. You go to things like genocides and wars and rapes and incest, everything. Nothing can happen if the karmic pattern, if the magnetism of the vrittis isn't a match. It won't happen. And if it is, there is a reason for it. We assume that if it's difficult, it's bad. And so that's where you have to start shifting. It's an unlearned lesson. And the unlearned lesson, you could be being made into a saint. There's a very sweet story told about Yogananda that he went to a movie theater with some of the disciples. There were some women disciples there. And there was a small child in the row in front, and the child was turned backward and was very engaged with one of the nuns. And afterwards, Master said something to the nun about, you were quite taken with that child, weren't you? And she said, yes, I just couldn't take my eyes off her. And Master said she died in a concentration camp in her last life, but the experience made her a saint. When everything else is gone and you're subject to such evil, what are you going to do? Are you going to fall into that same vibration, or are you going to transcend it? I've mentioned to you that I'm Jewish by background, and I was invited to this interfaith discussion, and we were discussing Jewish, Christian, and my friend who was a Christian Episcopal priest thought it would be amusing to bring a Jewish yogi into this thing, so he did. And we were studying the Holocaust because Jewish people always feel that non-Jews have to understand what it's like to be such a persecuted people in order to understand us. I think that we could present ourselves a little better, but that's his point of view. They're the average. But one of the readings was this rabbi wrote, and he said that the Holocaust was the shining hour of the Jewish people because absolutely everything was taken away and all we had left was our relationship to God. And it was our moment to prove the power of Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I thought it was fantastic. I'm sitting in this gathering. I couldn't get anybody to pay attention to it. We all had to talk about victims and, never again. I mean, everybody had to just commiserate. Nobody wanted to transcend. So they didn't want to transcend, so I just let it be. I had nothing much to offer. I just was personable. You see how different it is? And you see how it potentially turns everything around, but you see then all this responsibility goes right back on you. It's nobody's fault. Yogananda gave instructions in different places how to connect with the loved ones who've passed on. And even though the jiva may even incarnate and be living on Earth or in another planet in a physical body somewhere else, the memory of being your mother, it never goes away and can be reaccessed. That's how it's described. I don't really know what that means, but that's what's described. So she could be a man in Australia, but your mother here could still come as your mother because just the vibration will take form. I can't explain it more than that, but I know it's real. I mean, many of us have had that experience. After my mother died, my mother had Parkinson's, and it's a bad way to go, but she learned a lot from it. She herself said toward the end of her life, I hate to admit it, but this disease has been the making of me. That's what she said. It really helped her a lot. But she was, toward the end especially, she was very picky, and she really didn't really trust very many people. She always wanted me to be there and do it for her, whatever it was, no matter how trivial. So she dies, and I dream about her, and she's in what I believe to be the astral hospital. I mean, I believe this was a superconscious dream because this is very soon after she's died, and she doesn't realize that she's not sick anymore. She had been identified with being ill for so long. This is something that can happen that she didn't really quite realize that she could let that go. So she's in the astral hospital, and they're taking care of her, and they're trying to coax her out of that intense identification with that incarnation and just help her to see where she is. So I go to her in this dream. She calls me over like this. She sits me down next to her. She looks around, and then she starts giving me a list of things she wants me to do. And I said, Mom, I think there's a lot of people here who could help you. Well, she says, I don't really think so, like this. And I said to her, Mom, you know what? I'm just going to let them take care of you. And I just sort of started backing away from her, like this. Now that I've started, I have to finish. And then I woke up. The next dream I have, my father lived 2 years longer, and they were very attached to each other. The next dream I have, my mother shows up, and she's young. She's gotten over having being sick. And she's young, and she comes and to the place where my father was living. He had a bit of Alzheimer's, so he was in a care facility. I'm there. Mom shows up in the dream. Mom, I'm so happy to see you. But she really came to see my father. And so they go into their bedroom and shut the door, which is, my parents often shut the door to their bedroom when we were growing up. But after a short time, I hear her voice calling me. And I walk in, and she's begun to become old and ill, like this. And I kind of pulled her off of the bed where she was sitting with my dad, and I pushed her away. Too soon, I said, it's too soon, you can't be here. Meaning that as soon as she got engaged again with my father, that whole incarnation grabbed her again. And I pushed her away like that. Now, this is not a dream, but this is a reality. 2 years later, my father dies. My brother and sister and I, who are all very sensitive, were with him when he died. The next morning, we had never talked about this, but we all confessed to each other for those 2 years, whenever we thought about our mother, it was always a very agitated feeling. And so we never really thought about our mother very much. After my dad died, when we thought about our mom, it was perfect peace. She was just so attached to him. She just couldn't relax until he joined her. And then shortly after that, she came to me as a beautiful young woman, which she was, and she's standing by this window looking out at the world. And I just stood next to her, and we just kind of had this wonderful moment of just, you know, it's all done, and now we're free. And I've never dreamed of her since. Now, to me, I believe all of those experiences. They were so true when I felt them, and they're so consistent with the fact that nothing happens when you die. You just keep going in the cycle that you have to go through. And I didn't seek any of those experiences, but I found them wonderful. And I was also very glad that I could still help her, even in the astral world. Although I can't travel to the astral world, I was really happy because nothing happens when you die. She was my mother. She helped me very much, and I wanted to help her. And I was really grateful that God gave me the chance to just be a little bit useful. But then she came, and basically, it's fine. You don't have to be my daughter anymore. I'm on to something else. And that released me from the responsibility.